Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AMPC webinar today. Today we're lucky enough to have Jonathan Marshall and Josh Hall from Bondi Labs to present to us. So Bondi Labs is a software technology company with a focus on biosecurity, food safety and supply chains. They use smart glasses, virtual reality, AI and cloud technologies to enhance human decision making in the workplace. So today they're going to be able to talk to us about how we may be able to integrate that into red meat processing and the supply chain. For those that have not been involved in a AMPC webinar before, if you'd like to ask some questions, in your toolbar you have the function to ask a question. You can't just verbally ask it, you need to type the question and then we'll send it through to Jonathan and Josh, and at the appropriate time they'll be able to hopefully answer all the questions. If we don't get to all the to answer all the questions today, we will come back to anyone as well, or if somebody needs any further information. So thank you, Jonathan and Josh. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. And apologies about the mask wearing. Here's my face. That's
and here's mine.
Yep.
We're in Melbourne.
Yeah, as you can tell. So we're in day one of mandatory masks, but hopefully it doesn't impact too heavily. So I'm going to have a just quick introduction, and then I'll hand over actually to Jonathan for just a short part, and then I'll resume the presentation. So this project we worked on pretty much started halfway through last year, I believe it was. The key focus and the theme of this project was visibility in the supply chain. And so when we looked at, what that actually means is, there's visibility into the supply chain data, as well as visibility into the actual, on-site, being able to see on-site. There's a whole range of reasons why we wanted to focus on this, but I'm actually going to hand over to Jonathan Marshall here to really give a bit of a quick deep dive into, I guess, some of the genesis for this project and where it originally came from, and the reasons why we're actually using technology to provide a greater degree of visibility into all parts of the supply chain and meat processing plants.
Thanks, Josh. Next slide. I thought I'd get a very quick bit of background, and thank you for the opportunity, both Matt and Amanda. This is something we do not take for granted, so it is an absolute privilege. Yes, just to recap, we've been in the biosecurity inspection or the biosecurity sort of diagnostics management space for about six plus years, starting with work we had done with Chevron with the large LNG gas project that they were building on a small Class A nature reserve island off Western Australia, and training, basically the flight simulator for their quarantine inspectors. And they had about 250 of these inspectors, but they wanted to lift the quality and the standard of their training to give them the confidence that these individuals did have the skills to be able to identify pests and diseases that might be getting onto that island. And through that relationship, we actually started working with the Department of Agriculture and actually training their biosecurity officers. So quarantine and biosecurity, effectively the same thing. And training several hundred of their inspectors to basically be able to do the same thing, to give the department the confidence that their inspectors were able to inspect and identify and react to things that they see coming through any sort of port, supply base, etc. around Australia. Now, it's at this juncture, I think, to give a bit of context, I'll introduce the Chinese Academy for Inspection and Quarantine, which I think you'll get to see as we go through plays a really major role in some of the direction that we're developing. Now, the Chinese Academy for Inspection and Quarantine, which in 2016, when we first met with them, oh, that's fine. No, sorry, I've got Josh's slide control here, but I'll put it down here. Terrific. Which in 2016, when we met them, was the research and laboratory testing arm of what was then the Chinese Quarantine Ministry, or AQSIQ. Now, CIQ, one of its main aims is to identify global best practice in the quarantine inspection area, and then incorporate these practices back into China's own quarantine management and inspection practices. In 2017, so they were seeing and observing what was happening with Chevron, because Chevron at that time was probably the world leader around innovative technologies in their application for quarantine or biosecurity inspection. And they were doing work with some researchers at Murdoch University, which CIQ had some of its own scientists working at. And after seeing some of the work that we were doing with Chevron, the flight simulator for quarantine inspectors, in 2017, they invited Bondi Labs to enter into a joint venture with them to explore and develop innovative technologies around the whole quarantine inspection area. Most of the focus was going to be for the China domestic area, and we now have a small software development team set up in Beijing, ZJ Bondi Labs, which is the joint venture with CIQ. Now, there was a major ministry reshuffle in China in 2018, and the Chinese quarantine ministry was amalgamated with the GAC, or the General Administration for Customs. So now that agency has about over 100,000, both quarantine and customs officers. But CIQ actually moved into a new agency called the State Administration for Market Regulation, or SAMR. Now, this main focus for the CIQ responsibilities was around food safety. And this new agency incorporated the Chinese Food and Drug Administration, or CFDA, which is, so you can see here, all of this focus was going to be around food safety, food quality, both domestically and internationally. Now, one of the core areas that CIQ, our joint venture partner, was focused on developing was a traceability platform for the Chinese government. There is no end of number of traceability platforms in China, several proprietary ones by companies such as Alibaba, but Chinese consumers have little trust in commercial traceability platforms because of the sort of vested interest, you could imagine, of those proprietary platforms. So Alibaba obviously wants its platform to demonstrate that they are effective in provenance and tracking of food safety issues on their platform, but Chinese consumers do not trust. And so the Chinese government said, well, we need to set up our own traceability platform. And that platform, named ZJ Mayer, was being developed by CIQ starting in 2018. And through the conversations that we were having with them, we saw a very attractive opportunity for the Australian meat export sector to basically get on the front foot and be a strategic partner with CIQ to help them develop this platform, both for us to have a competitive advantage over other exporters of beef into China. But I think one of the key things was to get on the ground floor and help to influence what they require from a traceability standpoint. So there is no additional requirements on the Australian industry, and basically to utilize what we have developed that is then going to become mandatory for other export countries, and yet again, putting, I think, Australia on the front foot. So that was actually the sort of big catalyst for the project that Josh will now start to run through.
Good, thanks, John. So just to recap, that platform that John was alluding to, kind of built and managed by CIQ and their subsidiary ZJ Mayer, is just what I have up on here on the screen. It's a traceability platform where data can be viewed if it's been passed in. There is a component that shares parts of that data with the consumer in the form of QR codes put onto meat packaging that can be scanned in by the consumer, and they can see both tracking and provenance information. You know, the system was actually tested and run prior to this project with French beef and French pork. And so that kind of helped give a bit of a catalyst to say, you know, why isn't Australian beef also looking to be on this platform as well? But just to step back a little bit, I mean, this was packaged up in AMPC research project. So we really looked at two kind of complementary sides to this project, splitting the work into the investigation of the existing traceability platform, as well as looking to see how we can actually get real-time visibility to support and complement any investigation or traceability. And that was looking at leveraging smart glasses devices, which might have been in the news a little bit more recently, but These devices have been around for some time in other industries such as aviation, oil and gas, but yet to really be effectively seen in food processing, especially the meat industry. But I do know maybe even some on the call had run early experiments with these devices. So the work we did in this project was really building on the experiences of others there. So the project was driven by just a methodology of kind of research phase, a design phase, a development phase, and a testing phase in both sections of the project. In certain cases, conducting the research, which included things like performing interviews, documentation, going out and doing field trips, and then collating that information into needs analysis that then drives further stages of this project. That was actually done often side by side or at the same time for both parts of the project. So, the lessons learned from either section or the challenges that were outlined could be learned quite quickly in that nature. And then, with the traceability component to the project, that was really an exploration, testing in almost a low fidelity way to test an existing website with example data from the Australian industry. Whereas the smart glasses involved a little bit more heavy R&D and actual software development to overcome some of the challenges we'd outlined in the project. And then each of those had, I guess, a testing and evaluation phase in different ways. This project actually started to wrap up really at the start of the first lockdown for COVID at the beginning of this year. So we had to cut short some of the final on-site testing that we were going to be doing. But luckily, we're investigating remote tools, so we've been able to kind of overcome some of those challenges towards the end of the project as well. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of run through the different components of the project and talk about some of the objectives, what we did and some of those outcomes. So starting with the traceability platform, our key driving objective here was to try and get on the front foot if there is going to be a traceability platform that is utilized and by Chinese government. How can we be in there early to help drive what are the needs and the data that would go into such a platform? And so that started with exploring, I guess, the business and user needs. We actually had Swinburne University, who has a vast amount of experience in supply chain and logistics and traceability, come into the project to help drive some of that early discovery phase, as well as the evaluation. And then working with key project participants to design what some of the first phase data requirements would be for Australian exporters to supply data into this platform. And then demonstrate just a use case using example data of what processor information would look like on the platform, as well as kind of what the consumer might come to see by scanning a QR code. And just wrapping up with next steps, as well as developing a bit of a business case to demonstrate the value that a tool like this could actually bring, both from the Chinese side as well as the Australian side here. So part of this research and design phase, we actually had organized with some of the other work we do in the business here, a trip over to China, roughly around the time that this project kicked off. So we're able to actually leverage that trip to also touch base again with our partners there in China, CRQ, as well as meeting with Zhejiang Mayor to run kind of design workshops, present some of the ideas and concepts and get the feedback around the direction of the project. In addition to that, we're able to do a little bit of consumer research, going out into supermarkets such as Sam's Club, where some of the Australian beef exporters are sending their goods to, and kind of watch and observe how certain consumer behaviours, see how packaging's actually made when it hits the shelves, let's say in a supermarket type setting. So part of the investigation was also really around just understanding, what are some of the critical challenges when it comes to sharing data and understanding and using that data in a particular case. So For example, in situations where there may be a customer or consumer in China that reports an issue with a product, let's say it's Australian food product, there's a bit of a process and flow that does occur, reporting to the National Health Commission. That data might get passed to SAMR, the Department of Food Management. GAC would get involved, Department of Ag would get involved. CRQ has a role to play in kind of the testing of that food product perhaps. And there's all these different mechanisms and communication pathways. Lots of room for miscommunication. Sometimes there can be lengthy delays by the time, let's say, a processor gets word that there's a disagreement or a problem that's been reported. They need to, as quickly as they can, get the right information back to the relevant government agency. So there's a bit of an issue just around the passing of information here, and that's what this traceability platform provided by CRQ was there to help address in some part. So being able to for processors, being able to supply information to a central spot, it's already there, and then if and when an issue occurs, relevant parties can go to that spot of information, retrieve it, and ideally resolve the issue far quicker than currently is taking place. So how this would actually come to work is, there's a platform, there's a website provided by CRQ. Businesses can register on that platform. They can register their products and then start entering their batch information. Ideally, in the future, start automating that product batch information. And at each step of the line, there's an agent that reviews the information to check it is true. And where we also spotted an opportunity during this was improving the communication lines, that if an issue with putting data into this platform arises, there's actually a clear path to communication. And so the second part of this project was also looking at providing a solution to that. At the end of the day, data being on the platform, as well as being in a viewable content format for consumers in a limited fashion. So this project, working with the industry participants, we looked at, what is the data that is already available. We weren't looking to, create new data that needs to be shared or kind of a lot of heavy lifting on the Australian industry side. It was about kind of what's already there. There are certain mechanisms already in place that we do know about, where data is being shared and made available to certain parties. But if we were going to feed any or all of this data into a platform, what does that look like? And so we worked around that data structure from the simple company registration all the way through to the processing batch and then the shipment batch information. And so I guess to recap, this part of the project was about, there is this data platform that is ideally being built to sit in the middle, that allows exporters who might get information from producers to feed into the data platform, and then regulators or the consumer in China can have a certain level of view into that data. And so where we got to with this project towards the end was, we're able to, yes, demonstrate that data could go in. It was a bit of a manual process, and that was really the scope of this project. But we're able to have a level of confidence of the strengths and weaknesses of the platform to date. Swinburne University was able to help with a bit of the evaluation around that as well. And the platform is there if people are interested to learn a bit more about it. I'm sure you can reach out to us to learn some more of that information. Where we're at today is we're keen to, hopefully after this presentation, if there is interest, we might be able to progress this work a bit further. But to date, we've kind of capped off this piece of the research we did here. Just going to check, time check as well. Okay. All right, so the second part of this project we looked at the data and a way to have more visibility into that data. But then there's the actual, eyes on, especially in an audit procedure. Commonly there is third party, internal, as well as government and customer audits occurring quite regularly, as we came to find. And so how do we provide eyes into the plant, especially in, it's now pressing now, but when we started this project, we had suspicions that, events like, COVID might occur, but it was really, one of many problems that might happen. Now it's a reality where people literally aren't allowed onto site, or it's quite difficult for them to get onto site. And it may be stopping, production if they can't get onto site, such as a qualified vet or an inspector. There's certain restrictions now being put in place where there's a need for technology to step in and potentially help. So the objectives of 9 months ago was, how do we provide that real-time visibility? At that point, we were specifically looking at how do we help address contested non-compliance issues, especially overseas and in China. I know we were looking at cases in 2017 at that point. During and since the start of the project, I think there's been a few more contested issues, but we won't touch on those too much today. But going by our kind of methodology, we looked at business and user needs. We also wanted to look at smart glasses. So what is the best smart glasses device to be recommending to industry to help solve some of these pain points? Then working with industry to design new software features. So we actually brought in some of our own technology, video streaming technology, to kick off this project. We had a solution that worked, but it's may not have met the challenges of, let's say, sending live stream vision to China, and that was one of the key challenges that we brought into this project to help solve, which required a fair degree of R&D work. And then, we obviously implemented those necessary changes, made a couple of demonstrations on site, in processing sites, obviously pre-COVID, and then kind of capped off with a rollout strategy and business case outlining the value that these devices can bring. Okay, so to best explain the smart glasses piece, I'm actually going to try and give a bit of a live demo here. So what I'll be doing is I am sharing my screen now, but I'm actually going to be hopefully, and this is where I kind of rely on some of the moderators of the session. I just want to do a quick systems check. Can you see my face and see everything I'm doing here?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yes. All right, so I'm just going to exit out of the presentation for one moment.
While you're doing all that work, there is a question, and it might be that Jonathan might be able to answer for you while this is happening. Do you utilize, and this is from Peter Davenport, do you utilize global standards to uniquely identify products on your platform?
When you say uniquely identify, perhaps a clarification there?
I would imagine that would be around things like QR coding and the like.
So
I may be answering for this person, so I'm just asking you the question.
Because I think there is some confusion sometimes around this area, and actually not only confusion, concern, that the last thing we want to be doing is reinventing the wheel, and that's all part of the sort of current geopolitics at the moment and decoupling is there is a possibility, because it's happening in a number of other fields where sort of China is concerned about following other standards, and they may be creating their own. From what we can gather with the party that we're working with, the desire is to use existing standards. And so some of the leadership of CIQ were visiting Australia last year and met with yourself, Matt, and John Langridge, as you know, and it was about how do they leverage, and that was why one of the sort of the motivations and catalysts for the project was to get on the front foot that existing, standards, all the sort of requirements currently being used by the Australian industry are the ones that are used by this traceability platform that will, and their vision for this long term is that it will eventually become mandatory for all product coming into China, to give them that real end-to-end visibility. And so that is yet again one of the motivations, is so that there is no further impost on industry to do this. So long answer is our desire. We ourselves don't. We're trying to be a channel and getting Australia to be sort of, and the pragmatic view from their standpoint is Australia does have the best standards, and if we can be fast Josh talked about the French beef industry, we could have been ahead of them, and we still have an opportunity because they don't have a strategic relationship, but there is currently now a number of countries desperately trying to sort of get themselves on the front foot on this. I know the Japanese beef industry as well. And with all of those other conversations, who knows what may come out of it. So I think being first is key to ensure that, yes, we just use the current and existing standards and requirements that the Australian industry has.
Thanks, Jonathan. I gather, Josh, you're ready now?
Yep, should be ready to go. So just confirming, you can see the little RealWear screen there on the side and see my face. Excellent. Okay. So when we talk about smart glasses, there's a range of devices which I'll touch on a little bit later. But at the end of the day, it's kind of what I am wearing here on my head. So think of it just like a smartphone that is wearable. It has apps, it has a camera device, it has a screen, it has a microphone. So it can do all those things that a smartphone might be able to do. You can launch apps, which I'll kind of showcase in a moment. But when we're thinking about performing kind of real-time remote viewing, how do we go about doing that whilst being safe, keeping our hands free? So if you can imagine, if I was to walk around a meat facility using my phone to try and showcase certain key areas, maybe in an audit situation, it's a little bit unsafe. You might drop your phone in the next batch going out to China or the UK or wherever it's going. So the fact that we were looking for a hands-free, wearable, safe solution was kind of key and paramount to providing real-time vision. But most importantly, you can control this device hands-free. So, for instance, you're actually seeing on the screen there where it says RealWear. That's actually the screen I'm seeing. So that's the phone's screen interface. So I can use apps. So I could say commands like my camera. Okay, and hopefully you can actually see a bit of a vision. There's Jonathan down there. Take photo. Okay. And so what we can do is we can actually operate, the device hands-free for a range of different needs and reasons. And hopefully you can see the computer screen there. Navigate home. Okay. So I'll just show off one or two other little apps before we continue on. So it has many functions. We can do my programs, work instructions. Okay. So for instance, we might be able to, provide hands-free, just-in-time training, provide instructions step-by-step on how to operate, complex machinery or devices. Next, video, play videos, you name it. Okay, navigate home. And then finally, what we really looked at testing and improving on was kind of the remote streaming capability. So my programs, Elixir. Okay. And so Elixir is the software that Bondi Labs was already developing. We kind of brought it into this project to add in the additional piece of ensuring it could connect to Chinese users. Scan code. Okay. Toggle microphone. Oh, Murphy. Okay. I think our webcast is blocking using two microphones. All right, we'll end that little part of the demo there, unfortunately. We did test this. Anyway, navigate back. Rest assured though, what we can do with this device is make those video calls and connections to other users located here in Australia or anywhere else really in the world. Okay, just going to take my helmet off and just resume the presentation again. No, I don't want spell check. There we go. Alrighty. Are we just confirming we're back to seeing the presentation?
Yep, certainly.
Okay. Yep. So part of the investigation was to look at, out of all the different smart glasses devices that are on the market, coming onto the market, what is, the right device for the industry? So there's a number of factors we looked at. We actually bought and trialed a number of these ourselves as well as part of our testing procedure. Price is obviously one initial component that some people might look to first, but some of the more important things were things like battery life, making sure that it doesn't run out of juice within an hour's use, which some of them actually did. Some of the more popular ones did actually. Making sure that the device is ruggedized, it can work well in wet, cold environments such as a meat processing plant. And actually, most importantly, can you use it hands-free? All of these devices often proclaim, yes, we have voice recognition, but the quality of that voice recognition often is pretty vast. And during our testing procedures, what we actually found was there's really only one device at this point that has voice activation, keeping your hands free, that actually works well in a meat processing environment, and that happened to be the RealWear HMT1. There were some close seconds, but at the end of the day, that was the device that we still kind of stand by and recommend to be used in the type of processing environments you see today. So moving on, and just on price, I mean, at the end of the day, usually what we're starting to see is within a couple of use cases being performed, actual use cases where a remote inspection is needing to be performed, the price actually starts to pay itself back quite quickly once the travel costs and everything have been removed from the equation. So the projects looked at just a range of software development, designs, implementations, and then testing. In-plant testing was one of those key areas. So looking at a range of different areas such as Wi-Fi of the facility, the usability of the device and the software, security, communication with others in other countries such as China, and then looking at how do we roll out and use this device. And so what we came to find, especially during the testing phases of this project, was there is a particular bottleneck to be found, and that's actually in the network infrastructure of a plant environment. Some plants will be better equipped than others. Luckily enough, the key tested plant we were using did have adequate Wi-Fi, but even then, it was always a risk that we're mindful of just managing. And so we learned a lot of lessons along that way into how to better manage, set expectations about how these devices can be used in this type of plant-like environment, and in what areas, is it less suitable for. And so a lot of the outcomes from this part of the project was really understanding what's it good for, what's it not good for. Can it be used for remote auditing? Yes, but it's definitely still not a silver bullet here. We're looking at a device that can empower people, can be used if there's someone can't get onto site, but I think there's still always room for actual on-site auditing procedures, whether it's internal for QA and QC, or if it's third party or government or even customers wanting to get a virtual tour. And to kind of bring it all back together and kind of how this fits in with the broader project, our original objective here was creating visibility in the supply chains, particularly with that China focus. So, we see a workflow, a method where whether it's Chinese government traceability platform, or it could be someone else's auditing platform, the fact that someone could look at data remotely and at the same time also make requests to have actual eyes on the plant, eyes on the procedure, eyes on a particular area that they might be auditing. That's really the key and the key outcome of this project, was really having a good understanding of how these type of technologies actually come together to create you know, remote auditing type situations. And so you know, during this investigation also, you know, in part of the interview process was actually starting to identify different ways that, you know, if you're going to look at investing in a device like this, how do you get most value out of it for? Is it only good for auditing? The answer is no, actually. There's actually a lot more value that can be created by using this device. And so we also spotted opportunities where very similar visual inspection processes can carry across quite nicely and easily, such as, you know, the gamut of health and safety checks and inspections. You know, there's training opportunities, whether it's, you know, having checklist instruction or having kind of that remote mentoring just in time. Obviously, QA and QC activities it covers well. Maintenance and asset maintenance is another huge area, especially if you have a downed piece of equipment, it's stopping operations in a plant. This is a device that actually could come in and help troubleshoot on the spot, maybe fix the issue right away without having to get an expensive technician to come out and solve the problem. As well as, you know, we're also hearing, you know, the needs for, you know, marketing and sales departments. Maybe, you know, there's customers or people in different departments within your organization that have actually never stepped foot in a certain part of the plant. How do you get them eyes on to actually empower them to do their job better? And then, you know, more broadly into the future, we can hopefully start to see, you know, once it's been proven and there's a lot of confidence being built around this, that, you know, external use for either government, whether it's domestic or international governments, customer tours. Obviously, there's a huge ban on international travel at the moment. How do you get, you know, some of your most valued customers or new customers eyes on your facility or plant? You know, now there is actually the potential for a path forward in that, as well as supporting the needs of third-party audit organizations. So just to, I guess, quick time check, but to wrap things up, you know, both parts of this project really look to, you know, complement each other. The traceability piece, you know, as it stands, we've kind of finished up with that work, waiting to see if there's continued interest. With the smart glasses work that we did, that did and definitely has kind of shown its benefits and allowed us to continue on that work in a I guess, a follow-up project. And that project is really looking at bringing the technology and the solution, you know, all the lessons learned, the rollout procedures, everything from, you know, how do we, I don't know if you can see it here, but how do we deliver, you know, the units to industry in a nice, neat package that's easy to unbox? You know, you understand how to use it straight away. How do we bring that to the small, the medium, the large organizations within, you know, the AMPC framework, and hopefully, you know, the rest of the industry as well. As well as, you know, working more closely with third-party auditing and hopefully government into the future. So we are actually actively working on that as right now. We're in the thick of it, about to ship out the next couple of units at the end of the week. Won't update you all on how that's going just now, but I'm sure Matt might be able to allude to, you know, when's a good time for us to update the rest of the industry on how that part of the project is going. And with that, I mean, I really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to Jonathan and I today. I know we've got a bit of time for questions as well, so we're happy to stick around and answer any that might be coming through.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh and Jonathan. It's really good to have these kind of projects that are showing the industry, showing, number one, that the industry is being happy to be transparent and letting customers along the supply chain understand, and certainly the countries that we're exporting to understand the high level of quality that we're actually we're producing, and the standards that we actually keep in in our plants, which is a really good, a great thing that the industry is doing, and it's really good work that you're doing, bringing that to people, certainly in overseas. We have a couple of questions further that have come through from Jeremy Scoose, and he's used to be from Melbourne University. His question says, I may have missed it, but is there any work going back on farm to identify the specific farm/farm practices for the customer to view?
Yeah, good question. So at this point, we tried to contain the scope to just processor data. Yeah, I'm guessing we're talking about the data piece here. Meat processors are actually often the central point where they're often driving the demand as well as driving the quality from farmers. And so along the way, there's a range of data points that do come in, as the cattle come in. There's certain identifying attributes, which then can be linked to further databases. So often, what the data that ends up in a processor can actually be linked to some level back to the farm. So there is a path forward. This project identified that that's a possibility, but it also, opened up a bit of a rabbit hole in the amount and volume of data. And so we didn't explore it too heavily at this stage, but it was definitely kind of one of those areas that you could quite easily kind of continue back down the path as well.
Thanks for that answer, Josh. And I can probably add a little bit to it that the people that we've obviously spoken to from the CAIQ that I've spoken to in conjunction with yourself, their ultimate aim is to actually understand back to the producer as much information as they want to ensure that the premium nature of our product over here is understood and can be used, I suppose, from a consumer perspective to understand where their food's coming from. So there is a want to do it. It's around about ensuring that we've got the projects to ensure that can happen. The next question is from Matt Deegan, who is our environment program manager in at AMPC. Can a receiver mark up the live stream with non-verbal instructions for sender?
Yep. So the platform that we built, Alexa, does have annotation features, and we're also continuing to. We've got a backlog of extended communication tools, let's call it, that will further improve markup to the wearer as well as back to the web browser user as well. So in short, yes, there are some features, but we also have a roadmap of many more features to keep improving on that.
Okay, Amanda, are there any further questions that have come through that that I can ask the boys?
Not just yet. If anyone's got any last questions, please send them through and we will get them answered.
Okay.
And I also know from my own experience for being on these sorts of webinars, if there's any questions post the webinar that come to mind or through conversations that you have, please feel free to touch base with us at any time, post this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, I just have to say that
certainly,
our biggest learning is hearing the questions and then trying to nut out how that we can see that tools that we develop can actually help address and solve those problems.
Okay. So I've got a couple that have come through, which is fantastic. What classes are best for stabilization of video streams from heads? That's from Matt Adcock.
Okay. So yeah, there is stabilization is one of those key challenges for real-time video that is yet to be solved in the world. There's a level of procedural training that we recommend comes with using this device. So if you're give someone a set of glasses for the first time and they go off and they're like this the whole time, yes, the person on the other end is going to have a terrible time understanding what's going on. So there's a level of understanding that whatever I'm seeing needs to be somewhat stable for the user on the other end. I might just slow my head movements just a tad, just be slightly mindful of it. There is some inbuilt stabilization into the devices. That is a technology that is continually improving, often by the manufacturers of the device themselves. The stabilization that we've seen in the RealWear device is reasonable. I think probably the best developers of image stabilization are GoPro, purely because you've got action sports heroes doing backflips whilst live streaming what they see. So luckily we're not in that space. We're not doing backflips and extreme tricks in a processing environment. So the level of stabilization required is a little bit lower, but it is still, I guess, one of those technological barriers that everyone is trying to address. So from what we've seen, the RealWear is sufficient in terms of what its stabilization provides. Also because of the resolution that it can transmit at. Often the way stabilization works is you record at a larger res and then you actually send a cropped version that is stabilized. So the RealWear is still, I believe, probably in the better ballpark. I could go on about this forever.
But it's improving rapidly.
Yeah, it is improving. The devices as a whole are improving rapidly.
I have a couple of further things. I have a statement from Jeremy Scouse, who asked the question about going back to the farm. He comments that he remembers clicking on a TV screen while at Carrefour in France, the retailers over there, and getting he said getting a live view of the, in brackets, supposed farm pork in the cabinet came from. So I imagine with a supply chain such as the pork one, where it's much more intensively farmed than Australian red meat, that there's probably a supplier ability to understand the supply chain probably a little bit more intimately than having 70,000 producers providing a product within there. So, but that's an interesting way to market that whole supply chain thing. What are your thoughts, boys?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's a good point. Just from our observations and being in China and seeing how things are marketed to consumers there. I mean, John's got a bit of a verbiage, verify and then trust. So see and then trust what's going on, because obviously they've been stung many times. So often we'll see everything from restaurants. You'll actually see a live feed into the kitchen of the people working there, through to, yes, you'll probably have cases where you might pick up a product, be able to WeChat scan it, and actually see maybe a live stream into the distribution center, or even potentially where the item came from. And I think that is the mindset and where things are heading. And within reason, I think this technology can be utilized for those type of purposes as well. So yes, you might be having a customer wanting a live stream of the farm where the goods are coming from to verify that what they're reading on the label or the information sheet is actually true, and actually have a dialogue maybe even with the farmer themselves.
I don't actually think that it's, so if we think of the end game, that there is 100% visibility from end to end, and then you start to work back from that. And yet again, from our experience with being in China and with the people that we're working with, whose job is to ensure food safety and food quality, because the Chinese consumers do not trust internally. So yes, that's where that verify then trust. It's why live markets are so popular. And with their push around the use of technology, I do see that the end game is that real-time end-to-end visibility at any time. And so the potential for Australia, I think, to get on the front foot with this. And so even though the beef industry is slightly different to the pork industry, you could actually see that there's a number of network cameras, so smart cameras in a meat processing facility. And I've actually even brought that up. I said, would you really want to see into a meat processing facility as a consumer? And actually the answer is yes, because they want to make sure, they want to see people in, their white coats and using, incorporating, hygiene and how they handle food, because their view otherwise is a black box and does meat just drop on the floor and people dust it off. And if there are cameras on farm that maybe it's not, as you said, it's very different to the pork industry, but you connect all of those visibility steps within the supply chain, I think that is going to become the end game, and technology will be able to eventually facilitate that. And so to be on the front foot with that, I think is a major competitive advantage, because I'm sure that the meat processing facilities in Namibia or Brazil are nowhere near the standard that they are in Australia. So I think turning that into a positive and as a competitive advantage, it's going to be much harder for some of those other countries to lift those standards. And Chinese consumers, and I think eventually a lot of consumers, would love to be able to see that and that visibility. So.
Okay, so I have 2 more questions left, and so we'll try and keep them brief for you. Andy Poynton from Meat Inspection Risk Assessor has asked, is there an intention for customers to log in or log on anytime to audit or inspect?
In terms of when we say customer, as in like a supermarket purchaser or what have you, there is the possibility. I mean, it's a web platform that can have varying levels of permission and view of data, depending on what is there. So, the data that goes in, I guess there's a degree of expect it to be viewed by someone, whether it's government agency or customer. For the most part, though, the primary use case of that platform, the ZJMA platform at least, is more along the pure government side, as well as the restricted consumer view, as in like someone going to a supermarket and purchasing. But there could be the potential for a customer, as in a meat distributor in China or what have you, also having a snapshot view of certain parts of the data.
And with respect to the smart glasses, I think one of the possibilities is that, so if the customer is actually a supermarket or anyone who wants to have confidence around that visibility into a supply chain, say, well, we'd like to be able to do an inspection at 3 p.m. this afternoon. And so someone in the plant, the quality assurance manager, dons a smart glass. Now, when we had that conversation with John Langbridge from Tees, who is our core partner for the early prototype projects, this is going to be quite demanding. But his view was it's going to happen. So the sooner that we embrace it and it lifts our standards, that actually becomes that competitive advantage, because there will become a demand of, because from previous experience myself around audits, everybody is putting on their A game for that, and the auditors know that, customers know that. So if it can be that real time, anytime, let's just run an audit. I think that's, again, is going to become a competitive advantage. So at some stage, painful, but I think it's going to happen. So to embrace it and then realize that actually it becomes a competitive advantage.
Jonathan, surely, as an ex QA manager from abattoir and boning rooms, we're always at our A game. So I reject that totally. Says Matt O'Brien.
I stand corrected.
No, final question. We've got a couple of minutes left. So the final question is from Thomas Williams. How reliable is voice command in high noise environments?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, you did allude to it, but it will be a little bit more information would be great.
Okay. I mean, in all the testing we performed, you're only ever having to reconfirm or verbalize an instruction once with the RealWare device in a meat processing plant. So we were actively using them and testing them in a facility next to loud equipment. It's got about, I think it's like 3 or 4 separate microphone sensors in the device, so it actually does more of a triangulation, as well as the RealWare in particular. It's got some proprietary noise cancellation and voice detection algorithms. It's actually a bit of machine learning going on. That is proprietary because it's actually best in class. So it can be paired also with noise protective headphones, so you can actually hear the other person coming through. But the microphone that we've tested by far was the only one that was actually successful in giving voice commands in a noisy plant environment. Other devices like the Vuzix and others, unfortunately, you'd be repeating yourself many times sometimes and not quite understanding why it's not working.
But I'd actually probably just finish up on that piece of it. So we've been in this space, in a sense, with immersive technologies for about 7 years. And the speed and acceleration of development of new tools, what we will see in the next 12 months is going to be significantly improved than what we are seeing today. And so it's actually now, because it's not just the technology is just a tool. So it's actually starting to think, how does this get incorporated into our business processes? What are it's very much an assistive tool. So we often say it's human plus machine. So it's starting to rethink, how could we do things differently and more effectively and efficiently? And it's starting that sort of thinking as well, and then bringing in the tools. And as they evolve, they'll be able to do more and more tasks and do them better. So thinking how to do these things in parallel is how we approach all of this.
Yep. There'll be some specifics, but maybe shoot me an email as a follow-up, and I can probably provide some more insight and information about the device itself if you've still got questions.
Yep, certainly. Thank you very much again to Josh, Jonathan. There's been some really good questions come through. I'll finish on this comment from Thomas Williams. It doesn't require a response, but I think it's really important from us from a domestic perspective as well to keep it in perspective from a domestic market perspective. Some of these proposed visibilities may help solve problems of having an urban population that are removed from animal agriculture. So I think that's really, whatever we do to provide transparency and along our supply chain to our friends in China could also be something that helps us gain that trust and transparency locally. So I think that's a really good point there, Thomas. So again, Josh and Jonathan, thank you very much for presenting today. It's been a great presentation. There's been some really great questions, and wish you all the luck with the rest of the remote verification project, which hopefully we'll have you back in a couple of months to be able to present. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Josh and Jonathan and Matt for the session today. If anyone's got any further questions relating to the AMPC projects and that, please get in contact with Matt O'Brien and he will be able to give you some more advice on those. Just a reminder, the webinar was recorded today. I know there was a few people having some technical issues at the start. You will be able to get that off the AMPC YouTube playlist by tomorrow, so hopefully we'll have it up by then. And next week's webinar, we have Ian Jensen, who I know was sitting on the webinar today from MLA, is going to give us an update around microbiology and the supply chain, and in particular salmonella. So we look forward to hearing that one. Once again, thank you everyone, and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.